This video will discuss content from Chapter 8 in Murach. We're going to talk about arrays. An array is a way to store more than one value in a single variable. So think of an array as an ordered list of values. So we call those values elements. So the entire array has a single name, which is a variable name. So in this case, this array is named scores. And then each value is, we put all of the values into the array, and we have each value is assigned an index value. So this is scores at 0, scores at 1, scores at 2. So this is the index starting at 0, 0 through 9, and these are the scores that are included in the array. So the array allows us to put more than one piece of data into the same variable name. In this case, the array this array has 10 elements. And you'll notice that it is indexed from 0 to 9. So when we put 10 elements in an array, the first element is always 0. Sometimes we'll call this the 0th element. But whenever we are using an array or an array list, we're always going to start at 0 when we on the indices. So a single element in the array is addressed using the square brackets. So we would have normally just said scores equals something. In this case, we say scores and we give it an index of 0. That means that we're looking for this one has a value of 100. Scores at 4 has a value of 96. Okay, so we select the element of the array by using the square brackets. Also notice that we've named the array using a plural word. So previously our variable might have been named score. Maybe it's a score on a test or on a school assignment. We would call that score, but because this is an array, we're typically going to use a plural word to give it more context. So scores being the collection of scores, in this case, an array of scores. Okay, so we're going to say scores at 0, scores at 4. Each element here would be a single score. The array altogether is called scores. You can assign a value to an array using the assignment value. So just like you would say, show me what scores at 0 equals, you can also assign it a value by saying, put 100, put 96 into this element. You can also use an array index just like you would any other variable. So in this case, you could say if scores at 2 is equal to 100, then you can print it out just like this. So you can use scores the array with the index value just like you would any other variable. The data type of the array itself. So then in our case, the data type of scores is an array of integers, but the data type of each element is an int. Okay, so keep that in mind. The array itself is a different data type than the elements in the array. So all of the elements in an array have to be the same data type. In our example, they were all ints. They'll have to be int, double string, Boolean. You can also create your own custom classes, which we're going to be talking about in future work, where you can actually create an array of your own custom class. So remember that the array itself has a data type of an array, but each element in that array has the data type of whatever you define it. So that means that we'll get extra methods and such that are built into the array itself, things that we can do with it. Okay, here's how you define an array. So you have to define it using the new keyword, because an array is an object, kind of like a string, or kind of like a scanner or something, or the math object. So in this case, we have to use the new object to create it. So this is how we define an array. This is an integer array. So we say int array. So this is the data type for an integer array. Int square bracket. That's the data type for an integer array. The array name is going to be called scores, and we're going to set it to a new integer array of 10 elements. So in this case, we're creating a new array, int of 10. This is when you say int with 10 here, this is a creation statement. We're creating an instance of an array of length 10. This int without the number in between the square brackets is a data type integer array. Okay. You can also, so when you do this first line, it creates an integer array with 10 elements, and the elements are all empty. They will be assigned the default value for the data type. In this case, since the default value of the data type for int is 0, you'll have an array of 10 elements with all 10 elements being 0. You can also create an array using a defined list. In this case, we're creating an array of 4, so you can see the slight difference in the nomenclature here. We have the data type integer array. It's called scores equals new integer array, and then we give it an initialization list. So the initialization list is in curly braces, separated by commas. Everything in this list must be the data type of the array elements. So in this case, int. Okay, so when this element runs, we now have an array of 4 elements, with element 0 being 100, 196, 97, etc. Once you create an array, you cannot make it any bigger or smaller. Once you create an array to be 10, that's it. It's going to be 10 for its entire life in the program. There is a data structure called an array list that we'll be talking about in upcoming videos, which is more flexible than the array. But keep in mind that once you create an array, it's set in size and cannot be made bigger or smaller. You can change the contents of the elements. You can update elements. You can sort the array, but once you create it with 10 elements, there will always be 10 elements in that array. Here we see some more examples of defining and creating the arrays. This is just describes all the different ways you can do it. You can also use the implicit definition var for the array name and the new type. And so this can sometimes just save you some typing if you want to use this. These two methods would be, these two initialization steps would yield the identical result. So we're creating an array of double values. So in this case, we're defining an array double array called prices. In this case, it's not set to anything. So this array at this point is null. So the array is nothing. So it doesn't have any elements. It's got no values. It's what we call null, which means it's been defined, but it hasn't been created or set up with elements. Then we can say prices equals new double of 4. Now we have prices is now an array with 4 elements 0, 1, 2, and 3, and they're all of type double. Okay, you can do that all in one line like we have here. Okay, and then you can use the implicit assignment. You can create an array here of your own class. We'll be talking about this in subsequent weeks. You can also create an array using a variable. So maybe you want to prompt the user for how many elements they want in their array. You can use a variable name to define the length of the array here. So in this case, we're using a constant value called size, but I could just as easily prompt the user for an integer value and then put that in here. The length of the array must be an integer value. You can't have a partial element. So this value must always be an int. Okay, so this is examples of assigning values to the array. 0, 1, 2, 3. We could prompt the user to do this. Maybe we ask them how many elements do you have. They say 5, and then we do a for loop, and we can just prompt them for 5 values and stick them in an array. If you attempt to use an index value that's that's more than the length, you'll get an error, so a runtime error. So in this case, we've defined an array of double values with 4 elements. So that would be elements 0, 1, 2, and 3. If you attempt to use element 4, you'll get a runtime error, array index out of bounds. This means that you've attempted to use an index in the array that does not exist. If you attempted to use -1 or anything greater than 3, you would get this array index out of bounds error. There are only 0, 1, 2, and 3. That's all that works here. You cannot use anything other than those. Okay, here's an array of strings. It works just like any other string would work. Okay, we'll come back to this. This is an array of our own custom projects. We'll be dealing with that in future weeks. You can create. Here's another example of implementing the array with the predefined list. We can see it here with strings as well. There are times when we're going to want to use the contents of the array in part of our program. So we're going to want to iterate over that array. We're going to want to go through the array, look at each element, and do some logic with it. When we read all the elements in an array and we process them, we call that iterating an array. So in this case, we can use a traditional for loop. So we would create a for loop that would be start at 0 and go to the length of the array. So remember the array is its own data type. It's not the array is not double. The array is a double is a double array. So the data type of prices is not double. The data type of prices is an array of double. So it's got a built-in property here called .length that will tell you how many elements are in that array. So you can put that into a for loop, and you can then iterate over the array, and this is what you would get. So in this case, you run a for loop. It starts at 0, and it goes to less than the length. So in this case, it would be 0, 1, and 2. When length gets to 3, when I gets to 3, that's less than when I gets to 4, rather, that's less than the no, sorry. When I gets to 3, that is no longer a valid index because the indices are just 0, 1, and 2. And so then the for loop would end. Here's another example of using a for loop. In this case, we're taking an array called prices. We're summing it up, and at the end, we're going to do a calculation of to calculate the average of the values. So you see that we define an accumulator variable, double sum equals 0.0. We then use a for loop. We aggregate each of the prices element into sum, and then we do a calculation. Average equals the sum of the array divided by the number of elements in the array. There's another kind of for loop that you can use for arrays and array lists called an enhanced loop. This allows you to just iterate over the array without having to name the elements. So it looks like this. For double price in prices, what this essentially does is it reads each element in prices. Prices is an array of double. It puts that element, the value of that element, into this variable called price, and then we can use that in our for loop. Once our for loop processing ends, we go back to the beginning of the for loop and we get the next element in the array. So this works just like the traditional for I equals 0 loop that we saw in the previous slide. It's just a little less typing. This is a great tool to use if you don't care which element you're processing. In this case, you don't know if you're an element 0, 1, or 2. All you know is the value of that element. So if you don't care what the number of the element is that you're processing, then using the enhanced for loop is great. If you do care, and you need to know this is element 1, 2, or 3, then you need to use the traditional for loop. Okay, here's another example of doing the aggregation. So this example here with using the enhanced for loop is identical. The result is identical to this example using the traditional for loop. All right. The array itself, remember, is a different data type. So it has some built-in methods: fill, sort, search, toString. So these are we won't use a lot of these. I mean, sort might be a useful one. If you have an array of primitive data types or strings, then you can sort those. If you have an array of custom data types, your own class or something like that, then the sorting gets a little more complicated. But you can use the sort here. You can also create an array. Maybe you want an array of all, of all tens. You want an array of 10 elements that are all initialized to 10. You can use the fill method to do that. You can also use this toString array if you want to print the array out and see what it looks like. Here's some examples of the fill. We won't use this really, but just know that it's there. Here's the sort. We'll do a little bit of sorting on arrays just to play with this. Here's the example of the toString. See what happens here with the toString is that the array is converted into a comma delimited format. So because it's primitive data type, the toString, it works here. So the toString is actually a method that's built in on every object. So you can say arrays.toString. It will then take each element of the array, convert it to a string, and create one single string that is comma delimited. So in this case, this is an array of integers that we've converted to a single string looking like this: square brackets, element 0, comma, space, element 1, comma, space, etc. Okay. This is useful if you want to see what's in the array, or you want to try to print it out to the console for debugging purposes, or just to experiment with the built-in arrays functions. I should back up and say that it's very important that you have to do an import. So if you're going to use any of these functions, fill, sort, search, toString, you need to bring in the java.util.arrays on the import, just like we did the scanner. You need to make sure you put this at the top: import java.util.arrays. Okay, And notice also we're using the arrays wrapper class here. So we're saying arrays.sort numbers. We're not saying numbers.sort. Okay. We're using this wrapper class just kind of like we do when we're parsing the integer or parsing the double. We use integer.parseInt. We're using the wrapper class of the data type array to do that. So just be aware that you use the array wrapper class to sort the array. You don't, the sort is not a method that's built into the numbers array itself. Also, keep in mind that once you sort an array, it's sorted and you can't go back to what it was before. So in this case, the array was initialized to 26418, etc. Once we sorted it, it now looks like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can never go back to this number. So if you want to sort, if you want to preserve the order and of the original elements, do not sort the array. All right, we'll come do some exercises in a subsequent video.